All right, talking about suspension systems again. Part three. I think we might have a part four, and I think that'll be it. Today we're talking about more of the actual things that swing around and move around in the suspension system instead of just wheel bearings or shocks or springs. We're actually talking about the different types of suspension systems, like all the arms that swing around. So we're talking about the double wishbone, the McPherson strut, the trailing arm suspension, straight axle, and twin I-beam. All right, so the McPherson strut suspension. Simple, cheap, used on small cars or used on, smaller cars, cheaper cars. And they're relatively inexpensive if you have to work on them. This is a neat video to watch one in action. Go ahead and watch that at this time. Okay, you should have just watched that video. What I want you to notice in that video is that the entire spring assembly turns when the wheel turns. So as the guy turns the steering wheel, this whole spring and steering wheel assembly turn with it. That's a sure sign that you're looking at a McPherson strut. Okay, I would say that was the most common. Next most common, double wishbone. Some people call it an A-arm suspension, double A-arm. Also called double control arm. You see it on luxury cars, heavy cars, medium duty trucks, heavy duty trucks. It's a little more expensive, a little more complex, but it gives you a better ride in many people's opinion. Smoother ride. There's just another example of a double wishbone. See, you've got a wishbone at the top, a wishbone at the bottom, or double control arms or double A arms. But the point is, you've got them top and bottom, and this part just kind of floats. That steering knuckle just floats. Here's another video of the double wishbone suspension in action. Go ahead and watch that. All right, should have just watched that video. Enough about double wishbone. Let's go to another common one, the straight axle or the solid axle. You see it used especially a lot on older pickup trucks, like probably 03 and older, and of course the back of a lot of trucks. It's tough, it's simple, it's relatively bulletproof, just a good system, but it makes for a rough ride. Here's what the back of a straight axle vehicle is going to look like. It is just a straight solid axle all the way across, bolts to leaf springs, done. That's it. Here's throw a couple shocks on there, and that you've got a system. You've got an axle suspension system. Great because it's just tough. It's simple. They just work for a long, long time. They take lots of abuse. This is the front end of an 03 Dodge Ram 1-ton truck, Dodge Ram 3500. And notice it's not a whole lot different than the rear axle that we just looked at, except for the fact that it's got some steering components on it, as well as some ball joints here to allow these to pivot for the steering of the truck, and some universal joints stuck in here, but it's still basically a big straight axle. You can bet that truck's probably got a pretty rough ride. One big straight axle across the front. Even as new as 2003, Dodge had straight axles on these big trucks, and because they just work. They're just tough, simple systems. The twin I-beam, one of the wackiest things you'll probably ever see. Also called traction beam. Used on Fords from about 65 to 02. Again, tough and simple. More comfortable ride than a solid axle. A little better off-road performance because it's kind of like a solid axle, but it's broken in the middle. So you do have some independent suspension there. Also, some people just call it the Ford front axle because everyone knows what that means. And they market it as the best of all worlds. It's got the toughness of a solid axle, but it's got the comfort of an independent front suspension, like a double wishbone. And they used them for so many years. They do work. I've owned probably 8 trucks with this front axle on it. Beat the heck out of them. Had trucks with 200,000 miles on them with this axle, and I'd never had a problem. They're just good, tough systems that yield a little more comfort, actually a lot more comfortable ride than like the Chevy version of that with a straight axle in front. But they're weird looking, and they're when it comes to alignment, a lot of guys complain. Guys that do alignments all day complain about these. They're a little bit weird. Here's another view of it. There's an overhead view. They use radius arms in the back. That's what kind of holds the axle from going forward and aft in the vehicle. And when they go airborne, you see they just sag down like that, and you just get an extreme positive camber. Go ahead and watch this video this time. It's kind of a neat shot of the I-beams in action. All right, you should have just watched that video. Moving on. Another thing I want to talk about is trailing arms. Trailing and leading arms, I should say. So this is kind of its own subset of the other suspensions. It didn't really fit in anywhere, so I put it in here. But here's an example of a trailing arm solid axle setup. So it's got a solid axle. You'd find this on the back of Dodges. You find it on the back of Chevy Caprices. It's actually relatively common. Okay. Very few moving parts. Again, simple and tough. Couple problems with it though. There's few moving parts, which is a good thing, but you also don't get the comfort of an independent suspension when you use this type of trailing arm. You do when you use that type, but this particular type, you don't get that. There's less performance on cornering. You don't get a natural camber change. That's getting a little more than we're going to get into today, but just know that they're not as good on like track vehicles. They're also if it's this design, it's considered not quite as strong. If it's something you're really going to abuse the heck out of. Otherwise, not a bad system. You see them, I've seen them quite a bit. Just another view of what they could be. This is kind of a hybrid trailing arm system, but you see you've got some big beefy trailing arms holding up the hub back here. And then that actually is going into sort of almost like a straight axle hybrid as well. All right. So that sums up all the different main types of suspension. Go ahead and complete your assignment on suspension systems. I'm sorry, I believe that's part 3 at this time. And have a good day.